the BladeLiner exact gap at m1innovations.com. The first thing we want to do is choose the outliner blade of your choice, and we want to loosen the cutting blade screws. You want to make sure this cutting blade slides back and forth very well. The next thing we want to do is we want to choose the filler gauge of your choice, and what those filler gauges do is determine the distance that cutting blade is back away from the edge of the comb blade. These filler gauges represent different distances. So with these filler gauges, you learn your hand operation count. All right, so I'm going to choose this one here. I'm going to put it in between the metal brace. And I'm going to hold I'm going to hold the metal brace with firm pressure, and I'm going to use 2 rubber bands on each side. I'm holding the metal brace with firm pressure. And now the next thing I'm getting ready to do is I'm getting ready to put the safety grips on both sides of the filler gauge. All right. This allows this filler gauge to drop down on the bottom teeth of the stationary blade or the comb blade. Now I'm getting ready to set the blade and the BladeLiner in the center. I want to hold the filler gauge up, and I'm going to push the blade up against the back wall of the BladeLiner with very firm pressure. You can do it either way, that way, or you can do it with one push, but you make sure you use very firm pressure, still holding the filler gauge up. Now I'm going to let the filler gauge down on top of the comb teeth, on top of the stationary teeth or the comb blade. And the rubber bands hold the pressure down and allow that filler gauge to rest on the teeth of the comb blade or that stationary blade. You want to make sure the blade never raises up or pops back up, or you have to lock it back in and start over again. All right, make sure the pressure is very firm. All right, so we already loosened the screws up on the cutting blade. So we want to pull the cutting blade back. So the cutting blade moves back and forth. The filler gauge is resting on top of the stationary teeth, or which I would say the comb blade. So we want to push the cutting blade's teeth up against the filler gauge, making sure this blade doesn't pop up. All right, we're pushing the cutting blade up against the filler gauge, and we want to tighten the screws. You want to push it with one finger, or you may even want to do it with 2 to make sure you got firm pressure with both fingers. Make sure you're pushing with equal pressure with both fingers. The next thing we want to do is tighten the cutting blade screws. Constantly holding this cutting blade up against that filler gauge with very firm pressure. All right. And what we're going to do is pull the magnetic blade lock back, and the filler gauge will drop down. All right. We want to pull the blade out of the BladeLiner. And this cutting blade should be at a comfortable, sharp distance that ensures complete satisfaction with the client and a comfortable handset for any barber. Like I say, each one of these filler gauges represents a different thickness or a different distance. So this is typically how you operate the BladeLiner. I'm going to loosen the screws. You can slide the cutting blade back and forth. Push it up against the blade, push it up against the filler gauge. I'm going to tighten the screws, keeping the pressure on both sides of the cutting blade forward up against the filler gauge, holding it with very firm pressure. And the distance of that cutting blade is perfectly set back away from the comb blade, giving you the perfect range of sharpness and comfort. You can find this tool at m1innovations.com.